I'm looking out the passenger side of the ambulance, looking up at this apartment building. And this guy is on the second level, ripping his door off the hinges. And he rips it off and throws it into the parking lot.
Not safe.
Scene was not safe.
Good call.
At this point, PD rolls up behind us. So I'm like, okay, good. We're fine. So I told my partner, I'm going to go grab the narcotics. And I know how this is going to go.
Welcome to In Service, the EMS podcast, where frontline experience meets leadership insight. Hosted by Jason Falvey, a seasoned paramedic and EMS leader with over 30 years in the field. This show brings you conversations with people shaping emergency medical services today. From street-level medics to innovators on the bleeding edge of EMS, we dive into real stories, leadership strategies, and what it takes to build high-performing teams in high-stakes environments. Let's get in service.
We copy you down, Eagle.
Crystal Rimert is an educator who found her second career in emergency medical services. On the front lines, she quickly built a reputation for her passion for pre-hospital education, mentorship, and evidence-based care. Known for guiding new providers through the chaos of high-acuity calls, Crystal excels at turning complex clinical concepts into practical street-ready skills. James Jed Durden, a veteran paramedic, is renowned for his leadership and dedication to field medicine. With extensive street experience, he maintains composure in high-pressure situations. Ensuring crew focus through clear communication and teamwork, Jed teaches using real-world scenarios to enhance decision-making and resilience. His strength is combining clinical precision with frontline EMS wisdom. I want to make a statement. We work together. We enjoy each other's company, and we're joking around here. It's just because we're close.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But don't mistake the joking for the seriousness of the subject or the professionalism that we deliver every day. All right. Welcome, Jed and Crystal, or Crystal and Jed, however you prefer it. Really excited about what we're going to talk about today, EMS soft skills. And I think it really makes the difference between a good paramedic and a great paramedic, or a good EMT and a great EMT. They can be technically proficient at their job at IVs, intubation, splinting, driving. But I think if you're missing that component, it really limits them.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. I appreciate that you took the time for us to come and sit down with you. And while I by no means think I'm an expert in this area, I do feel like I have some things to offer. And I'm really excited to be here. I'd love to speak more about that.
Great. That sounds wonderful.
Yeah, likewise. I've been listening to it.
Sorry, Jed, you can't say that. You can't say that.
This is not getting edited out, right? No, I'm happy to be here. This is really exciting. I think this is a topic that is something I enjoy talking about. And it's something I feel like I haven't really gotten good at, or maybe not even good at, but it's something I've been trying to practice a lot in my career, is working on these softer skills and being the kind of provider that I would like to be. And I've learned through people like Crystal and others that have, come before me, that have taught me some of the ways in which I can kind of soften myself with my patients.
Excellent. All right. So, Crystal, tell us where you grew up, where you're from.
I was born in Virginia. I was a Navy brat, and my father and grandfather were in the service, so we traveled, moved over to Texas, and came to Georgia. A lot of softball growing up, and played here in college, and really, thought that I would always be an educator, always be a teacher, and after about 15 years, I decided that there needed to be a transition in my life, and I traded one service, for another type. So I came into EMS and worked under some amazing medics and had a great job, a great time, and really just have enjoyed being here and naturally transitioned right into EMS education. Didn't take very long for that to happen. So that's kind of my backstory.
Yeah. Well, you're really gifted.
I appreciate that.
Jed, where you from, where you grew up?
Yeah, I was born here in Atlanta at Northside Hospital. Raised here, lived here pretty much most of my life, and grew up on the north side of town. Pretty normal, boring family. Was not an Army brat, but I am a brat. No, I'm just kidding. Grew up playing baseball, but music is my one love. Got really into playing in bands in high school. Thought I was going to make a career out of that, and found out that that's really hard to do. When I finished high school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I knew I didn't really want to go to a traditional 4 years college, not really academic like that. So I ended up going to the local community college, doing a few classes there. I ended up running into an old friend of mine who had gotten into EMS, and he was talking about how cool it was. He was an EMT, and kind of reminded me of, when I was a kid, I really wanted to be a firefighter. And I was like, well, that sounds interesting. And, I found out to become a firefighter, you have to be EMT certified pretty much in all cases. And so signed up for classes at the local community college and got my EMT certification. I was an EMT intermediate for about 6 years and became a paramedic in 2017. And I've been here ever since.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great. Any EMS calls over the years stand out?
Not a single one.
Thank you for your input.
Thank you.
Man, Jen and I have had some amazing calls over the course of our year. Really, some great learning curves and some amazing outcomes, and really some cool things. I think that it's always a testament to how cool this job is. That on any given day, you can be the last thing that a person sees on their way out of this world, and you could be the first thing that a person sees coming into this world. And I don't know that there's many other places or jobs or opportunities where that exists. So I try to remember that, each day. I think that, the calls that stand out a lot of times are the funny calls too. And we've had quite a few of those together and obviously again separate. He's got quite a history of working down in the city as well.
Yeah, I did some time in the city and just south of the city for a while, and it's a whole different ball game. I really enjoyed working down there. The area we're working now is a lot more suburban, but in the city, you have it's a higher call volume. Some of the calls you run will be higher acuity than what we normally run where we work, and so you get really good at maybe like the complicated trauma that you don't see as much up in the suburbs. But with that comes working with a large homeless population and all the things that entails.
Also a huge change in culture. There's a melting pot.
Radically different change, yeah. And especially me, I grew up in the suburbs. I had been down to the city for, sporting events or what have you.
Festival.
Right, all the things. But when you're working in that kind of community, you see things that you never even knew existed. There were times where I would go into neighborhoods and I worked night shift the whole time I was down there, and it was dangerous and it was scary, but I loved it. And I thrived on it. And I think it made me the provider that I am today, in part. So I'm grateful for that time that I had down there. I don't know that I could do it anymore. I don't want to work that hard anymore, but it is part of my story.
You said you didn't have any calls that stand out, but I'm sitting here thinking to myself, I don't know how many years ago it was, but you had a guy on PCP rip his front door off.
So that was a crazy call.
That doesn't stand out to you.
No, well, so the problem that I have is a lot of it runs together, and there's bleed over, and I can't hold on to a lot of that stuff anymore. I can't let it sit in the forefront of my brain. And so if it's not a remarkable call or it's not outrageous, I just dump it.
I feel like that's outrageous.
That call was outrageous.
The spectrum of call.
Yeah, the quick and dirty overview is we responded to, it was a psychiatric call, or that's how it was dispatched. And it's like 3:00 in the morning, and we roll up on scene at the same time as the fire engine behind us, and there's no PD yet. So I'm looking out the passenger side of the ambulance, looking up at this apartment building, and this guy is on the second level, ripping his door off the hinges. And he rips it off and throws it into the parking lot.
Not safe.
Scene was not safe.
Good call.
At this point, PD rolls up behind us. So I'm like, okay, good. We're fine. So I told my partner, I'm going to go grab the narcotics. And I know how this is going to go. So basically, it takes 4 firefighters on the engine, myself and my partner, and a handful of cops to get this guy to the ground. And we're chasing him throughout his apartment. He is completely naked. I think I left that part out. He's completely naked, which is your first tell that something is wrong. They're always naked.
Red flag.
Yes.
We're chasing this guy through his apartment, and he has just trashed the place with a baseball bat. Like, everything is destroyed. And as far as we know at this point, all it is he's just psychiatric. We don't know anything more than that. He's yelling at us, but he's not really making any sense. And so we eventually were able to to sedate him and restrain him to a long backboard and carry him out of the apartment to the ambulance. And there isn't any more issues, but we drop him off at the hospital. I come back to the hospital a couple hours later, and I'm talking to the nurse that I give report to on him. And she's like, oh, yeah, so he's in the ICU on a vent. And I'm like, what? Come again? She's like, yeah, so it turns out he had a brain bleed. Took him back to CT, and we saw that. And that was my first exposure to that type of brain bleed that can cause such a radical personality shift. Because I remember while we were on scene with this guy, like we're getting frustrated with the fact that he's non-compliant. And he's like spitting at us and kicking at us and cursing us out and all these things. And it was enlightening to discover that this type of personality shift can occur in somebody experiencing a brain bleed. I'd never encountered that before. And I haven't since, I don't think.
I had one very similar to that call with a in 40s male who just was standing there and fell backwards. And, he did have a cut to his head, but he had that kind of waxing, waning behavior where he would, Brady down into the 30s and then turn into the Hulk Hogan. And we would have to fight. And then he would take a little nap and then he would come right back. And turns out that he had been doing steroids and had a rupture that led to a bleed. And I'm like, this is not what this call was supposed to look like. This isn't what our dispatch notes said. I'm not prepared.
I didn't read about this in the
Not
textbook.
prepared. Right. Where was this?
Yeah.
So, I think in the scheme of calls, to what Jed said, there's so many of them and so many come and go. And we kind of become numb to the crazy that we see in the world. The things that really stay with me are the ones that I know had the greatest impact, on patients.
Excellent. And Crystal, we spoke earlier before we came on, and you were talking about 10% of the calls we run are the true emergencies. And let's talk a little bit about that. You had mentioned the education piece.
Yeah. So, my background is education. There's an interesting dynamic that happens when new students come through and, we get them on the truck to precept. And there is this idea that all of the things that they've learned over the past 2 years are going to be the things that they go out and do every single day. And that's just not the case. Those really high acuity, challenging things, those may be 10% of the calls that you run in a year. The other 90% are going to be, mental health and toe pain and, all of the things that are going to require, you to go in and really manage a scene, manage a patient, and manage a situation. And that really requires interpersonal skills. And I think that just kind of catches, especially people new to this industry, really off guard, that all of the time that they spent in school, learning this trade, they were going to go out and do every single day. And that is just a fallacy. It's not. If we divided school up into the types of calls that we would be running, we would spend 7 months on ground level falls and interpersonal skills and 10% on these really high acuity skills. So I think there's just a transition that has to happen and a realization, that they need to develop these and refine these because it ends up, proving better for everybody in the end.
Right. In your experience, Jed, what are the most important soft skills EMS providers should develop? Well, what do you consider them?
I mean, the biggest one is obviously being empathetic. You're exposed to so many different types of situations and people, and you're expected to perform in every case. And the biggest thing that has been able to help me is to put myself in the shoes of the people that I'm called to serve and figure out what it is that they need from me. And that requires a level of empathy that I don't think I started this job with, but I think it has left an impression on me. And I think that that's probably the biggest thing I've had to work with. Adaptability is one, because you might be walking into a situation where you think it's one thing and then it completely flips and becomes something else. That's happened time and time again in my job, where you're given, a complaint or a dispatch code and you go to that call and it's not at all what you thought it was. And so the ability to change on a dime is super important. And I feel like that's also something that I've kind of refined over the years. I didn't possess any of these qualities at the beginning. I didn't know what I was doing half the time. And I'm amazed that I've made it this far. But that's where I'm at now. And I think that those are the things that I try to bring to the table with the new people that we see today. I was going to tag on to what Crystal was saying. So one of my favorite things in the world is to have a new EMT hop on the ambulance with me for the first time and just to see that deer in the headlights look, because it's so vastly different than what we learn in the classroom. And those first couple calls, I mean, you don't know what's going on. And I remember feeling that way almost 15 years ago, the first few calls that I ran, just being like, oh my God, like this is not at all what I was led to believe this job is. It's not all blood and guts. It's not all needle decompressions and intubations. It's the real nitty gritty dealing with people, the peopling.
Yeah. And then there's another change when you go from BLS provider to ALS provider.
Yeah.
You know, the roles change, the responsibilities change, and the expectations change. And so you're back to square one in terms of being adaptable and recognizing that now everybody's looking at you and you know, what is your management
And you
skill?
do it all over again.
Yeah. And you still have to connect to the patient, right? You have to form some type of relationship for them to trust you enough to stick them with a needle.
It's hard.
So how do you communicate empathy? You mentioned empathy as the number one.
Mhm.
How do you communicate that in high stress situations?
That's a good one for you.
You know, I think that
Sorry.
I don't know how I feel about this cancel culture.
It's too early.
You know, empathy is a hard one. Empathy being walking in somebody's shoes, and it's unrealistic to think that we have walked in all of the shoes of our patients. The longer that we do this job, the more experience and exposure we get. And I think that empathy begins with honesty and transparency. So if you can connect with your patients in a way that makes them feel like that you are trustworthy and that they can trust what you are telling them, and they can believe you, I think that the physical components of empathy begin with body language. You know, how we approach the scene, how we approach the patient, and I think it ends, you know, following up with making sure that we are doing exactly what we're saying and we're communicating exactly what we're going to do and giving some autonomy back to that patient, letting them have some choices. I think empathy really is a holistic, you know, treatment plan for how to go in and move a tough situation forward.
Right.
I agree. I was thinking about something else too as you were talking. Honesty is a big one. But walking in and saying, hey, here's what's going to happen. Here's the situation. And I'm going to be upfront and honest with you about how this is going to go down. I will not keep anything from you. I will not deceive you. I am here to be your advocate. That has worked very well for me in the past. I think people respect that level of honesty. I think sometimes they question whether we're being honest with them, especially some of our psychiatric patients. So I think being able to sit them down and walk them through the process of what's about to happen, honestly and openly, goes a long ways.
We're not there to judge anybody. We're there to assess them, treat them, and transport them if necessary.
Right.
That's really what it boils down to.
You know, one of the things that I talk about with students that get on the truck with me is that, you know, not to bring religion to the forefront, but just humanity. You know, my obligation as a provider is not to decide whether you're worthy of treatment. It is not to decide, you know, if I should treat you. My goal as a provider is to show up and evaluate the need and to do that, whatever that means. You know, oftentimes some of the most underserved population that we have is, you know, the homeless population and mental health population. And oftentimes, you know, they'll go into a hospital and they'll be dismissed. And, you know, 2 hours later, you're picking them up on a different truck and you're running them back. Sometimes they just need to eat. And so when we are called to be empathetic and we are called to serve, then we should show up and serve and not decide who's worthy of that. And I think that people see that and feel that. And so that's when you can create that rapport with a patient, knowing that you are there to advocate for their very best interest, even if it means a turkey sandwich.
100% right.
So one of the things that I think is important to also note is that Jed has been a paramedic a lot longer than I have. My background is in education first, and EMS was a second career for me. And when I got my paramedic, I went to our clinical direction and said, I want to be double medic, even if it means a pay cut, even if it means, you know, a truck that I might not have normally picked a time deployment. I want to be a double medic truck, and I want to be a double medic truck with somebody that I trust that's going to help develop and show expertise and experience that I just did not get in the classroom. And I gave him a list of 3 people, and Jed was on that list. And I was fortunate enough.
Was he number 3?
He was not. He was not.
No.
And ironically, I did not know him that well. We had worked a few shifts together as an EMT paramedic years before. But I really appreciated the way in which he carried himself and the way in which he did his job. And I felt like it would be a good match. And I was so fortunate to end up getting to be his partner for over a year. And, the cool thing about that is you spend a third of your life on the truck. It was really just a neat match and development, of our professional skills, but also our personal skills. And we joke around a lot. We have a good time. We're very comfortable. I often think that they won't give us students anymore because we would tear through the town. But like I said, I love him and I think he is an amazing medic, and I've really learned a lot getting to be his partner for such a long time. And I appreciate all the things that he did to invest in me. And I just think that that's an important part of this job is building, your coworkers and building your team up and really investing in the next generation. And even though I'm older than him, he did that very thing and gave himself selfless to me. I appreciate that. I'll never forget it.
Yeah, I want to say I appreciate you saying that about me. It's crazy because I feel like I learned more from being your partner than maybe you learned from me. I was in a place in my career, I think, where I was maybe bordering on complacent in some cases, and you lit a fire in me that I think had gone out a couple years before, and now I'm reinvigorated with wanting to be a better provider again. I want to teach in some capacity. I like being with students, and I think all that is testament to working with you. And I had a great time. I loved working with you. I miss working with you. And hopefully we can do more stuff together like this and with the school in the future.
What role does emotional intelligence play in building trust with patients and families?
Man, I think that emotional intelligence goes a long way because it often will tell you the why. Why is somebody behaving so erratically? Sure, there's a clinical aspect, like, Jed explained earlier in his patient that PCP versus brain bleed. But, if somebody is upset beyond what the situation calls for, or somebody's behavior is bizarre, being able to not feel like you have to match that energy, that you can step back and try to regulate and say, okay, why are they so out of control right now? What is really speaking to them? What is bigger than what we see on the front surface? I think goes a long way in being able to help somebody else regulate and to help de-escalate that situation. But, if we react to what you see, then, anger begets anger, right? So
yeah, and the first step in that, right, is being able to regulate your own emotions, recognizing when somebody's maybe triggering you or right.
I think I just lost my train of thought on that. Edit that part out.
No,
I had a point I wanted to make.
That's going to be your only contribution today.
No. So emotional intelligence is the ability to recognize your emotions. And by being able to recognize what emotional state you're in, you're able to more readily recognize the other person's, and therefore you can manage the other person's.
Yeah, I think that having the self-awareness and realizing, how does my body look right now? Am I looking antagonistic? Am I crossing my arms? Am I making eye contact or not making eye contact? Like, are my body movements and language the same as the words coming out of my mouth? Or is there an inconsistency there?
Right.
I think that another big part of that, I laugh when the students go down their assessment list and they're like, BS high, scene safe, and they're going through their list. There is nowhere in their brain that they associate the fact that once they've decided that the scene is safe, that the scene may become unsafe very quick and escalate and change. So, emotional intelligence, I think, also just bleeds over into our ability to recognize, the changing dynamic on a scene, not only in just patient acuity or in, the entire situation. And, it's important to use that skill, not just in helping control, but also in helping keep you safe and all of the people on the scene safe.
I can remember being an EMT 10,000 years ago, and you roll up to a call and this guy is going off on me saying horrible things. And I realized at that moment, he has no idea who I really am. So why would I get upset that he's calling me all these names?
But it's so easy to do.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so easy we let it consume us and then we react before we even know what's happening. I've
Right.
done it. I've been there a bunch of times.
Yeah.
That's how I used to be earlier on in my career, and I've worked really hard to not do that as much. And sometimes I'm good, sometimes I'm not. You've seen me
This reminds me
come
of
unglued a couple times.
this reminds me of a great call. I'm going to be very short with. We had responded to a psychiatric emergency, and he was screaming, screaming.
Not me.
No, the patient. And PD was like, yeah, y'all got him. He's good. He's in the ambulance. You've loaded him up. And he has a moment of lucidity in the ambulance and realizes what's happening. And so he decides at this point he's going to become combative. And so here Jed and I are holding this, what do you say, 300 pounds? 280? How much
Yeah.
was he?
This is the guy behind the
window?
Arby's?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And
Oh, this
so-
is a great.
So we're both holding him down.
They've got the meat, by the way.
They had the
This
meat.
guy had all the meat.
This guy ate all the meat, all of it. He ate. There was none left.
We had ran him before a couple
Right.
times.
We
We
had-
had a rapport with this guy, and he had always been cool with us.
And so he's laying on the stretcher, and we're trying to get him buckled down. And he decides he doesn't want to go anymore. But he is obviously inebriated and intoxic and does not hold capacity. And so here's Jed and myself, and we're holding the patient down, and I'm on his feet. And I have like my feet wedged up against the wall of the ambulance, just trying to hold. And we're radioing for PD to come back, and PD does not come back.
They never came.
They didn't care.
No.
And so after 15 minutes, I looked at Jed and I'm like, you know what? He's getting all the drugs. He's getting everything.
I don't even know that we made it 15 minutes.
So I let go of his feet, and Jed's still holding him down. And I pull up the drugs, and Jed's like, hey, maybe we could always give more. Maybe we should start slow. And I'm like, no.
This is after he told me that he had drank a gallon of vodka. And normally I wouldn't believe that, but with this man I did.
And I said, Jed, I'll give him whatever you want, but you're riding it in. I'm driving. You can have whatever you want. He's like, okay, it's fine. It's fine. He's trying to calm both of us down. I'm sweating. It's the middle of August. And so we give him 2.5 and we wait, and it calms down. And I get in the front seat and I slam the door, and I'm angry. I'm so
You were,
mad.
Yeah.
We had just fought this dude, and I'm so mad that PD didn't come back,
Mhm.
and I'm so angry. And we start driving, and all of a sudden I see Jed's face pop up into the little window, and he goes, hey, Crystal, you want to pull over? And I said, no, this is your bed. You made it. And I'm thinking he's back there fighting. And so I throw the thing into park, and I pull off, and I sling the door open, and I see Jed, and he's casually, calmly bagging this man who is Papa Smurf Blue, because 2.5 of Versed has put this man into respiratory arrest. And I realized in that moment that I had very much lost control of my emotions, and I was ready to do all of the things because I was angry. And it was quite a lesson learned. It was a very, very valuable lesson in how important it is to stay in control of ourselves. And I will never, ever forget that call or Jed's little face popping up in the back.
As calm as could be.
Hey,
Pull over, please.
Hey, could you just pull over?
This is a good spot right here. Just pull over. Anytime you want to.
And I
Ripping open packages in the back of the truck.
slung that door open so hard, I was ready to come back there and full on WWE this man.
Yeah, you were. I
And
wish you could have seen your face.
Yeah, I was mad. I was
Yeah.
real bad. That was.
And no call stands out to you, Jack. No call stand out.
This is a theme for us. This is a theme. So,
It is. Yeah.
anyways, emotional intelligence. I think it was
You
important.
didn't have any at that point.
No, to recognize our triggers, and I had been triggered.
And
I
it's
was
tough when you
yeah.
have to get physical.
Well, hopefully you have a partner you can rely on. And, if you're having a day, you can pass the torch to them and they can take, the call.
Mhm.
And we had that dynamic.
Mhm.
And luckily I was in a good spot and you weren't. And so,
That's
we
right.
played to our advantages.
Knew our limits. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. I think that's a good component of that too.
How do you think EMS leaders can cultivate soft skills in new hires?
I think that's a tough question because I don't believe that it should start there. I think that's the the kind of the middle of the road and almost the end result of refining it. I think that it starts way back in initial education and exposing, these skills and really developing these skills. It's such a hard turn from learn all of these technically specific skills of how to do all these things. But then also, let me show you what empathy means. I think almost like being a parent, so many of these are modeled by the people that we respect and value.
I've always believed that. I've always tried to be, in the midst of chaos, the calmest person in the room or the calmest person at the scene.
It's hard to do sometimes.
It really is. It really is. But you practice it enough, you get there. And if you can't control yourself, how are you going to control a scene like that?
Yeah.
Or direct others to control a scene?
Yeah, I've always told the new people that ride with me, when you're going to a call and it sounds like it's going to be crazy, or you're in the midst of a chaotic scene, stop for a second and feel your pulse. Because if it's racing, you need to take a step back and take a second for yourself and take a deep breath, because a lot of people are relying on you to keep it together. And it's something that you have to learn, I think. For a while, I had to fake it. And if you fake anything long enough, you can get there usually. But I think it came with experience too, and just realizing, okay, well, I've dealt with this before or something similar. I think that I'm going to be okay. But yeah, just take a step back and take a breath. That's okay. That's allowed. You don't have to have the answer right away.
That's really good advice.
Or knowing when you need to step aside. I think that's a good component of that too. Is just like with the story that I told. I knew that Jed needed to be the one to ride that in, and that I needed to go up front because I recognized that I was reacting instead of responding. So, taking that second, having that moment, but also recognizing when you're in over your head, and leaning on the people around you that you trust to help right that ship.
And it's interesting because when I go out to scenes and I get there, I have a very detached perspective of what's going on. I didn't just witness this battle royale that happened. I'm walking up with a fresh, detached perspective, and that helps me to manage what I have to manage in those moments. But let's switch over and talk a little bit about de-escalation techniques. When you're confronted with an agitated or combative patient, what are some of the verbal de-escalation strategies?
Scene is not safe. Scene's not safe.
Let's assume it's safe. They're just agitated.
Go ahead, Jed. You're great at this.
Oh, I'm great at this?
Yes.
Okay. Well, like you said, no scene is ever safe. Even if you think it is, I've had scenes change on a dime. And even with the police there, it became very much not safe.
Yeah, of course.
So situational awareness is key. As far as de-escalation goes, I don't know that I am an expert in de-escalation necessarily. I'm very much a work in progress. What I've found is there is a process of escalation that I try to adhere to. So initially, I give everybody the benefit of the doubt. I don't know what's going on. I just walked upon this scene. The only thing I know is somebody called 911 and they told the dispatcher certain things, and now I'm here. And it's my job to figure out what's going on. I think a lot of people make the mistake of assuming they have more information than they do from the get-go. So I'm going to use whoever's on scene, it could be bystanders, it could be family, to help fill in those gaps. And hopefully they know the person and they have a decent rapport with that person. I can use them to my advantage to try to calm them down.
I've always found that if somebody's yelling at me or they're really speaking to me in an aggressive tone, I bring my voice down quite a bit. I speak even softer.
Yeah, people will try to match that energy subconsciously.
And I think that that goes alongside of we do what we know. And so, as parents and, growing up, teachers, coaches, loud equals compliance. If I get aggressive and loud and I overpower you, that you will comply. And oftentimes, if there's a authority, right, figure, then okay, fine. If I'm trying to get my, 12-year-old to comply, that might be an appropriate route, but it is rarely the appropriate route in emergency medicine.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, there's a mental health component, there's a psychiatric component, there's a trauma component, there's somebody's got some narrow, spicy things going on that make it challenging. So loud is not compliance. And I agree with you, coming down and bringing, the whole situation down by lowering your voice, I think is an excellent tool. I think the other part of de-escalation that is often missed is that the first thing that we should be doing is observing. When you walk on scene and you see the chaos, right, you're often met by a police officer and, they're trying to tell you all the things, and the patient sees that. And so now you are part of the bad guys because, you're following through. So I always hold a finger up and say, is it safe to go talk with them? Let me do that first and kind of observe their behavior and try to create some neutrality in that as long as you can. I think that that's an important component to de-escalation. Not making promises, keeping autonomy where it's possible, and being honest. Physically, my body language plays a huge factor in that space. But again, I think Jed has said something that just needs to be driven home. The scene has the potential to change at any given moment. So knowing your, egress in and out of the building, never placing your back to the patient that potentially can cause you harm, using your resources all around, recognizing whether there's a chemical component on board, PCP or, some other mitigating factor that would make things challenging. I think all of those things you're going to gain in that observation moment right when you walk up.
And even with, we're talking about extreme cases here that we've mentioned, but on the lower end of that, right? Somebody's just slightly agitated. I would always say to them when they're maybe barking at me a little bit, I just ask them if they're okay. Hey, are you all right? And that usually refocuses them, brings them back.
Just calm down.
Chetta, you all right?
Fine.
Uh-huh.
It's going to be fine.
Right. Just calm down.
Yeah, don't say that.
Would you just calm? Especially
Nobody has ever calmed down when you say that to them.
Especially women.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about body language when we approach people. How does that fit into the de-escalation component?
That's the first thing people see is you walking up in your body language. If you're walking up with your arms crossed or you look angry, and it's not hard to assume that there's going to be a problem. I had a call not too long ago, and it's kind of a long story, but it involved a psych patient, and he was in a crisis, and he showed up to his psychiatrist's office at about 9 o'clock in the morning, and they didn't open for a couple more hours. And so when they got there to unlock the door, he met them there, and they had a history with this guy. They knew about him. And he was telling them, I need help. I'm suicidal. I'm hearing voices, all of these things. And so they did a quick interview with him and then signed a 1013 order for him on site, which initiated the 911 process. And then I got there. And so
for people listening, give me a rough definition of what a 1013 is.
Yeah. So it's basically a form that is filled out by licensed staff. So usually it's a licensed clinical social worker or a physician, or I think law enforcement as well has capacity to fill this form out. And basically it states that the individual presents a threat to themselves or somebody else, or is no longer able to take care of themselves effectively. And so it mandates that they have to be transported to the hospital against their will if they don't want to go, to be evaluated by a doctor. And they can be held up to 48 hours?
It's 72 now. Yeah.
And so they had filled out this form. And when I get there, I'm met at the front office by the psychiatrist and several other staff. And they're telling me about this guy. And they said he's behind the building. So it's an office building. And behind it is like a nice little grassy area. There's some concrete steps leading down to this pond. And they said he's sitting out there. He's been sitting out there for an hour or two, just staring at the water. And I'm like, cool. Is he going to be a threat to himself or me? Like, well, no, he just, he's not of sound mind. He's hallucinating. He's psychotic. And we think that, he can't take care of himself. And so I'm like, great. Will he be responsive to me? And they're like, well, maybe we'll see. So, and there's one police officer there. And before I go down and make contact with this guy, I tell the cop, I'm like, hey, so I want you to be close by, but I don't want you to be in his field of view. I'm going to go down there, just myself, my partner will hang back, and I'm going to make contact with this guy, and we're going to talk. And if I feel like I need you, then I'll gesture to you or something. Great. So I walk down the hill to this guy, and he's sitting down on this little concrete stoop looking at this pond, calm as can be. And I walk up and I introduce myself. Hey, I'm Jed. I'm a paramedic. I'm here to figure out what's going on. The facility staff called me, and they're concerned about you. And he's immediately dismissive and like, what the hell are you doing here? I don't need help. I'm fine. And I'm like, okay, listen, can I sit down with you for a second? He's like, no, don't sit down next to me. And I'm like, okay. And I take a step back and I try again. I'm like, hey, I want to see if I can help you. And I'm making direct eye contact with this guy. And I guess I finally got through. He's like, okay, you can sit down next to me. So I do. And for the next 20, maybe 30 minutes, I sit next to this guy and we have a conversation about his life and how he got to this point. And through talking to him, obviously I've asked all the orientation questions, but not just the standard, how many quarters make $1.50? Who's the but we're having a conversation and he is able to articulate everything. He is of sound mind. He doesn't indicate he wants to hurt himself. He doesn't want to hurt anybody else. He has admitted to hearing voices occasionally, but not acutely. But at this point, 4 or 5 other cops have showed up and they're starting to surround us in like a semicircle formation. And my partner behind me picks up on what is happening. He taps my shoulder and I see the cops coming around the corner. And basically, for 30 minutes, I have tried to convince this guy who is very insistent on the fact that he's not going to the hospital. And unfortunately, I kind of have to take him. And I'm trying to do it in the smoothest way possible. But now I have 4 or 5 police officers surrounding me. And the biggest one of the group decides to start moving some of the furniture out of the way that is kind of surrounding us in anticipation of having to go to the ground to subdue this guy. There's been no indication that this is going to happen. This guy is totally calm so far. But they have made the decision in their heads and they're getting frustrated that this is taking as long as it is. And it was so frustrating because I watched all of the work, the 20 or 30 minutes I'd invested in this guy just disappear because the police and their body language completely set him off.
And their actions, moving that furniture just implied this is what's next.
He knew immediately. He's like, why are they doing that? And we all knew. And luckily it didn't come to that. I was able to to smooth things over. But they had no clue the impact that they had just had. They just showed up and they assumed, okay, well, this is going to happen.
And I think that this is a problem, across the board, is that ultimately, especially as an ALS provider, as a police officer, you have the authority, if necessary, to chemically restrain, to physically restrain, to use force aggressively. And while that is an option, it should be the last option. And oftentimes it is not. Oftentimes that power play comes out right from the beginning. And just like, I know we joked about earlier, the gentleman that we had to chemically restrain, that I left Jed in the back of the ambulance with, unfortunately, there was a devastating consequence to that drug administration. And, we often forget that there can be adverse effects of chemical sedation. If there is a way to get compliance without having to escalate all the way to the very top, we should be doing that first. And it most often can be done. It's just not.
And once you push that plunger, you can't take it back.
No.
You just have to deal with.
And I don't understand why the police, it seems like, don't understand the risks that come with this. I mean, we've seen the news articles across the country where, specifically ketamine, we've had some issues with that with people across the country. There are risks involved, and they need to know that. And I've seen several instances where they've pushed providers to go ahead and sedate when the provider wasn't necessarily in that same mind state. And maybe they didn't have the experience to push back and say, no, that's not what's best for this patient. Have you ever encountered that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's been multiple times that I've gotten out of the truck and been met by a Leo, the law enforcement officer, telling me, we're going to need to chemically restrain him before my boots have hit the ground. And that's not.
How about if I assess them first?
It's not your decision, sir. I appreciate that you are concerned. But let me see where we're at before we start making those decisions.
It's listening here. I was thinking about, I've seen it go the other way too, where an ambulance has arrived on scene for a patient who's hostile and combative, and the medic did not chemically sedate them. And I just happened to meet that crew and the police officers at the hospital, and it was absolutely insane. Somebody was going to get hurt just pulling that person out of the back of the cruiser. The police transported on that situation. And 5 people carried that person in. And that just went wrong the other way.
I think the root of all of that is education and experience. And unfortunately, it's dicey, especially with mental health. Nothing is predictable, but the more experience and the more education we have to prepare ourselves for what we see or what we're faced with and how to use tools other than the most aggressive tools that we have, I think will result in better outcomes for our patients all along. I mean, it's just a better choice.
What are some other mistakes you've seen EMS providers make in the field relative to de-escalation mistakes? Maybe not mistakes.
Yeah.
Maybe
Lessons hard learned.
that would be correct.
Yeah. So, to your point a few moments ago, when you were talking, there are patients that need to be chemically and physically restrained. There are. And so to be, afraid to do that, I think oftentimes puts you and your partner in a position that can be
Or the patient.
Very dangerous. So, knowing your tool bag and using all of your resources, to end a difficult situation. I think a lot of times we overlook that there are more resources than just the one or two that we know will work typically. Using our law enforcement, using fire, using the family on scene if that's a possibility to help de-escalate. I think oftentimes the biggest mistake that I see is walking in and expecting compliance through authoritative measures. You will comply. That does not typically work out well. Ignorance in the sense that, we're not constant lifelong learners, right? We're not using Con Ed. We're not using things that will help us be better providers. We're not expanding our knowledge base. And I think that that's a huge mistake as well. But
raising your voice.
Yeah.
Probably not
absolutely.
Good. Sarcasm.
Yeah, very rarely does that make things better. Makes me feel better in the
It
moment.
lights it on fire.
Yeah. Match on gasoline.
Right. Showing your frustration openly with the person.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't usually help either.
Like when I told Jed he made his bed. You're riding this in?
Yeah. It's a tough one.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
And I tend to use humor a lot, but even that doesn't work sometimes.
No.
It can feel dismissive to the person. Let's shift over and talk about caring for autistic or neurodivergent patient. What's the definition here of neurodivergent? How should EMS providers adapt when caring for an autistic patient or a neurodivergent patient?
I think that, the DSM-5 a few years ago kind of eliminated the Asperger's side and just put autism as one big, long sliding scale. So everything from, nonverbal, non-communicative to what we did know as Asperger's, which are highly functional. You might not know it or recognize that they, have autism, but it essentially is, it's a pretty easily recognized presentation if you know what you're looking for. So, to answer your question in regard to how should we change, the first thing we need to change is observation and knowledge, recognizing that things like stemming behavior where somebody is using repetitive language or they're maybe, tapping their shoulder or doing something that's showing us that exists. I think that's the identification of that need, I think, comes first and foremost. So, once that recognition exists, then we can adjust and adapt and kind of switch gears and recognize that we can serve them in the way they need.
What does it mean when somebody's stimming?
So,
everybody knows that.
That's right.
Well, for the sake of the audience.
You might see somebody like continuously tapping or pacing in the same exact pattern, or self-harm is considered a type of stimming. So somebody would headbang or beat themselves in an area of their body. A lot of people don't recognize that this type of behavior is the way that they are regulating their nervous system. That's the way that they're calming. So if what they're doing in terms of stemming is not preventing you from being able to do your assessment and it is not causing them any harm, you should 1,000% let that happen. maybe, for instance, if there's a car accident and then the child isn't hurt, but the mom is, and, they want to pace around your stretcher, fine. Okay. If you see something shiny on my uniform that you need to have and it isn't going to cause you harm, fine. If you want to tap your knee or repeat everything I say, like an echo chamber, fine. Do it. Whatever it is that you need to do to help keep you calm, I want you to do that. So stimming behavior is pretty synonymous with the autistic population. Another area that I think is really important is the language that we use. Oftentimes, like for instance, if I was doing a stroke assessment on, a person with that isn't neurodivergent, right? And I would ask them for the arm drift portion to stick their arms out like Superman, because everybody recognizes, what that would look like so that I can test for strength. That is not going to be something that an autistic person would typically pick up on. They're going to need either do what I do, and I'm going to visually show them, or I'm going to say, put your arms out, sit down on this stretcher, follow me to the ambulance, stand on this piece of paper. Whatever it is that I need them to do, it is going to be clear. There's difficulty reading between the lines, understanding sarcasm, interpreting. They need direct instruction. And I think that, the recognition that that's how they need to be spoken to, and it is not disrespectful. It is what their brain needs. The recognition of that, the earlier the better, to get the compliance.
I think that a lot of people maybe struggle with feeling overly confrontational or being too direct. And you've told me to be and speak more directly, and to not use euphemisms or sarcasm, but to speak literally, because that's the only way in which they're going to understand what we're trying to get them to do.
Absolutely.
What about touching them?
That's a no-no. There's a big misunderstanding that, autistic people don't care for, physical touch. That's not the case. They do. They just only care for it from the people that they trust and that they love and that they understand. So, if you imagine for a second what a scene looks like for an autistic person, you come rolling up with lights and sirens. Mm-hmm. They have been involved in some type of terrible incident if we're coming. There may be people who are injured. They don't understand. They're having a hard time communicating what they're feeling. And you come blazing in. I mean, think about how we walk onto a scene. We're carrying all the equipment. We are moving with purpose. Right. And then we come in and we start barking demands, and we're doing all of that for the best interest of the patient, but not that kind of patient.
And they might not understand why you're grabbing their arm to take a blood pressure.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What about eye contact?
You can give it to them, but you can't and shouldn't expect them to give it back. If that's not something that they're comfortable with, you're there to assess their medical needs, not to make them compliant. You're there to support them, and oftentimes that will only escalate. If you think about the brain and the way that it works for autistic people, and it's funny because a lot of people in EMS are neurodivergent. We're all a little neurospicy.
Mm-hmm. What?
Yeah. Those ADD folks, they're thinking 1,000,000 miles a minute. And oftentimes, if you ever watch somebody who's neurospicy do a patient assessment, they're like, hey, tell me about your meds. And before you can even get that first one out, they're moving on to, do you have any allergies? And we are moving through.
And they missed the meds.
Yeah, they're moving through that list
4 more times.
That's right. Yeah, we go back to that. The way that the autistic brain works is it's way more like a file cabinet. And so when you are asking for something, when you are asking for them to answer a question, it typically involves them going back and retrieving that file, finding it, and bringing it to the forefront. That takes 2 to 5 seconds for somebody who really struggles to communicate, right? And so I want you to think about 2 to 5 seconds is a long time for a neurospicy brain to wait to answer that question. So if you start in with a second question, you've already started the overwhelm in that brain, because now they're still busy trying to get the first file out, and all of a sudden we're having to go get a second file. And, that's a challenge. One of the best explanations I've ever heard about what it looks like and feels like to be autistic is if you were to go to a foreign country, you've been learning on your lingo for 2 years how to speak German, and you go and you're involved in an accident on the Autobahn. And all of those responders come blaring up. They're bringing all their equipment. They're bringing all the things, and they start yelling at you in German. And all of those 2 years that you just practiced, they're gone because you're in fight or flight and you are panicking and you're trying to communicate what your drugs and allergies are, and you can't. And, you just feel absolutely out of control and helpless. And that is very much what it feels like when you have the inability to be able to communicate clearly.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the things that I think is important to mention in regard to managing a scene with a patient that you've identified as autistic is that there's some things that you can do to help minimize. If you can go without lights and sirens, if you can lower the noise, if you can reduce the number of providers that are there, especially if you determine right out the gate that your safety is not in question, then really we're looking at the safety of the patient, right? And so minimizing the number of providers that are right there. I think all of those things help lower the overwhelm that happens on somebody who may be neurospicy or on the autism spectrum. There's a call that I ran way early, way back when I was an EMT, and I didn't have all the tools in my bag that I do now as a paramedic. It was a patient that had a longstanding history in the community of really just causing some chaos. There have been multiple really high acuity, calls that had gone on where lots of providers had to get involved, and we got dispatched out, and she was threatening suicide. And she, 14 years old, autistic, verbal, but not strong verbal. I had one other experience with her that was not exciting at all. And so when I had arrived on scene, I was surprised to see her up you could see the second story, big window above the stairs, and she was standing there flashing this 12-inch butcher knife. And there was, numerous providers that were there. And my paramedic partner at the time went to get the, sedation drugs ready if that was what we were going to have to do. And myself and one of the Leos had gone to try to de-escalate the situation. And I walked in and I asked if she remembered who I was, and she said yes. And I said, good. I said, well, then let me have that knife because you know that this is not going to go down like that. To which point she promptly handed over the 12-inch butcher knife. And I said, okay, well, then now it's time to go to the hospital. So I need you to go get into my ambulance. And she walked right out of the house, down the stairs, and got into the ambulance and proceeded to buckle her seatbelts. And everybody was shocked. And it was, really a situation of just communicating in a way in which she needed to hear. She needed to hear it be very direct. She needed to hear it be very, without choice. This is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. And let's go. And she ended up being transported and, getting the help that she needed. And sometimes it's really just as simple as asking. And I don't know that anybody on the scene and all of those providers thought to just ask her to hand
they
them
were
the
probably
knife.
screaming at her
They
to
probably
put
got
it
four
down.
different cops giving
they
four
were.
different commands.
That's exactly how that went down. There was a whole lot of people who were trying to get compliance through, authoritative measures and screaming and escalating. And I just asked her, and that's all it took. And so it had a great result. And sometimes it really is that simple. Part.
I remember thinking back on that particular call. I did get a phone call that night from, might have been the negotiator that was on scene, or the sergeant. Might have been the sergeant.
Yeah, he's the, I think that his role at that time was, he's on the negotiations team.
Yeah, he just couldn't have been more impressed with the way because it was going not well.
It was not going well.
Until you showed up and stepped in there, because really you understood the mind of that patient.
Well, I recognized, and then that was to my point much earlier in this conversation about these kinds of patients is just first observe and recognize, because it doesn't hurt to ask. She could have easily said no, and at which point I would have backed out and let police do whatever they needed to do.
Mm-hmm.
But recognizing that that's what we were working with, and those were the challenges she was facing, a simple command of asking her to, hand it over, resolved that issue and de-escalated it. So don't be afraid to ask.
Very good. Let's talk about death notifications and compassionate communication.
This one is near and dear to my heart, though.
It's a really difficult one.
This one is one that's important to me. As a provider, this thing, I had zero education really about neurodivergent people or death notifications. This came much later in my career and through intentional educational opportunities of how to refine this. The first time I ever had to tell somebody that their family member had died and that there was nothing I could do, I felt so out of place and overwhelmed and out of my league. And it really ate me up. And I said, there's got to be a better way. So, I sought out some resources and figured out ways and tried to understand how to, refine this skill to do a better job. And I think now, while death is not ever comfortable for anybody, I really take pride in how that scene management goes and how the communication to the family and the patient goes, and really try to just maintain a level of compassion and professionalism that, it unfortunately might be the last thing that they remember about their family member, especially if it's, an in the field or in the home termination.
Yeah, I remember when I was a new paramedic, I had probably been a week out from being released, and we were dispatched to a cardiac arrest. And it was a male in his 50s. He wasn't all that old, and he had just collapsed after dinner in the living room, and all the family is there. And it had just occurred, so he was still workable. And so we did probably about 30 minutes of resuscitation. And unfortunately, we never got him back. He was asystolic on arrival with no change. And God, I was probably 20, how old am I now? So it's probably about 28, 29. And I had to stop the resuscitation and have this conversation with the family who was watching all of this go down as to why we were stopping and what was going to happen next. And I was so unprepared. And I felt like I was drowning. And I couldn't find the right words to say. I felt like I was fumbling everything I was trying to get out of my mouth. I couldn't look him in the eyes. And there was just this terrible feeling of like, what am I doing? I'm not qualified to do this. No one taught me how to do this or what to say. There was no class that I took in paramedic school that said, okay, well, when this happens, this is what you do next. It was very much, well, just figure it out. But it was tough, and I think it haunted me for a while. And the reality is that family probably doesn't remember a single word of what I said, because at that point in time, I wasn't important to them. They were consumed by the emotions of losing their loved one. But I feel like it could have gone so much more smoothly. And I feel like since then, I hopefully have come a long ways. Every time I do one, it's still hard, and I still feel like I struggle to find the right words. And I don't even know if there are any right words or if there are right things to say. But what matters is your presence, is sitting next to that person or those people, the family, giving your time to them, giving your attention, empathy, and asking, is there anything that I can do for you? Is there anybody that I can call? And I've made phone calls to all kinds of people at their request. Be prepared for them to say yes. I've called clergy, I've called priests, I've called pastors, I've called family, I've called whoever. And I've spoken with them, and I've had to tell them what's going on. And that's not easy either. But that needs to happen. And my fear is that some people that are providers in the field don't take the necessary amount of time to really do what needs to be done. And on top of that too, sometimes the system is really busy and we're getting pushed back into service when we might not be ready to quite yet. And these things take time. I've been on scene for well over an hour sometimes dealing with this, but it needs to happen properly. It's super important. And I wish we did a better job of preparing our people to go into these situations and be more effective.
One of the lecture series that I attended on this when I was trying to really refine my own personal skill, one of the things that shocked me is it said that 77% of ALS providers had stated in the past year that they had to deliver a death notification. And of those 77, 50% of them said that they felt unqualified to do that they did not lack the proper, or that they lacked the proper training and development and education and how to be able to do that efficiently. And I think that's a huge failure of EMS. There's not, initial education, there's so many checked boxes that needs to happen. And this is really a soft skill that's, I think, overlooked. And to your point, Jed, I think that it's important to recognize that just like all of the things that we do, creating a procedure or a skill set and how we manage this, I think, is ultimately going to lead to the success or failure. We flounder because it's unfamiliar and it's uncomfortable. It's the same reason that everybody packs up all their shit. They just pack up everything the second that time of death is called, and
Can't wait to get out of there.
right,
It's
because
awkward.
it hurts them too. It hurts us too, and I think that is really a challenge. And one of the things that was talked about in that lecture series too is that we are, celebrated often for being robots, going in and really refining and perfecting a skill like intubation. We go through it, check boxes, and we do it the same way every time, so that when we get into the wicked, right, when our brain overwhelms, our training will lift us up. And so there's this robotic, approach to how we perform, and cardiac arrest, resuscitation efforts is something that we practice and practice and practice. And so having to vacillate, shift, move back and forth between the humanity of the situation and the robotic nature of doing all of the things to ensure that, you are doing everything for that patient possible. The patient shifts. The moment that you say time of death, that patient ends, and you have to ensure that there are no other patients on scene in regard to the family. And with that shift has to turn off the robot and turn on the human side of you. And that's where there is I think in our community, there's just an uncomfortable, the grief, the chaos, the overwhelm, the absolute loss of control and emotion of a family member who just found out that maybe, the love of their life for the past 65 years has passed. Is that grieving is a sight and a scene that as a provider, you will never forget. It is the things that sit with us. And so it is natural to want to get away from that. It's natural to want to move away from that. And that's, in my opinion, the wrong way. We should be leaning into that and providing any support that we can, to that family and in that moment to help, their loved one, that human transition.
It will help a lot with the providers processing all that as well.
Absolutely. And the family. There's a lot of data to support, that the grieving process is shortened, and the grief is not necessarily lessened, but the process of overcoming it is better when they're allowed to be part of the process, and they're allowed to be in the room. They're allowed to witness that all of the things were done and all of the things that we could possibly do to help save their family member. And unfortunately, we couldn't. That part of their processing is really benefited by participating to the limits accepted.
Yeah, something that I have kind of taken upon myself is at the beginning of these calls, if I have a chance to, and I think about it, I try to ask the family or whoever, hey, this is what we're going to be doing. And do you want to be a witness to this process, or do you want to, go get their medications and other things in order so we can figure out what their history is? And more often than not, people, I think, will not like to, but they would want to be a part of the process to see all the things being done to save their loved one. And I think, like you said, that does kind of help kickstart the grief process, because they bear witness to the things that we did, all the attempts that we made. It wasn't like we just came in and pronounced them and then left. There was a lot of work that was involved in this process, and it was still not the best outcome.
And I make it a point when I'm working this arrest as a provider to get the names of the patient and the names of the family member, or at least a family member there, so that when we're deciding what we're doing and we're talking, we don't refer to them as the patient. We refer to them as John. Okay, John has not responded to the medications, and unfortunately, John is not breathing, and his heart has stopped beating, and we're, coming upon a decision of, whether or not we're going to, continue resuscitation or not. Barbara, talk to me. Tell me, would you like to continue to be part of this, or, do you need some space? So, I think just personalizing it makes a big difference in the humanity of it, as opposed to just keeping yourself separate.
My first time doing a death notification, I was 23 years old. what the hell does a 23-year-old kid know about that? Looking back. And the victim, the patient, was 23 years old, and we got called out 2 o'clock in the morning for a suicide attempt. And, the police are trying to de-escalate, and we pull in the driveway. My partner says, hey, go inside, see what we need. I get inside the house. The parents are pointing down the hall. I go down the hallway. I can't get the bedroom door open. It's cracked because there was a nightstand or something behind it. But I managed to get into the room. And the first person I see is the police officer on scene. He's in crisis, clearly melting down. And he's telling me that, he got the go sign, right, to kick in the door. But he couldn't get in, just like I couldn't get in. And by the time he got to the patient, the gun went off. And you can imagine what that looks like, right, in the room. Mm. And I get down and check the patient, and there is so much blood. And the top of his head is missing. And my partner sticks his head in through the door, and I tell him, we're not going to be working this. So I get out of the room and start walking down the hallway back to the living room, and the parents are sitting on the couch with the police officer, and the first question is he going to be all right? I was in no way prepared for that. I think I just shook my head no.
Yeah, I don't know how you respond to that question.
Yeah, right. And, you tend to become numb to things the longer you do this, right? You can let yourself become numb to it. Because my partner went right back to bed. He was asleep in minutes. I was not. But, that was my first experience. I really brought the room down, didn't I?
Like I said, back to your point earlier when you asked what calls stand out. These are the ones that I think make a huge impact on us as providers. And not even that we question if we did all the right things or if we could have done something different. I mean, we do. But you are being invited into somebody's home. And the honor that is first and foremost to be in there with them. And, the process in which this goes down and, the team that's there and the responsibility of just honoring that person's life. I really think that we can do better as providers to shift the culture here. I really, really feel like with a few things, procedurally that we could do to help benefit all of the people, unfortunately not the person that died, but all of the people that are still here. When somebody dies, they're not the suffering party anymore. It's the grief that overwhelms all of the people that survived. So, what we do and how we do it is going to impact, them and their grief and their ability to overcome a terrible situation, even if it's just the tiniest bit, the way in which we approach those scenes and allow for those families to start that healing process, I think is huge. Also, there's a lot of data out that shows that it decreases burnout on providers to be able to have this process because the weight in which these things are in our hearts as providers is profound. And you just spoke to that. I don't know how many years ago it was, but 23 seems like a far distance. And
what are you trying to say?
Wow.
Watching
that was pointed.
You tell this story, I can still to this day see the grief on your face.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that it's part self-protection, it's part healing for the family, and I think it's part honoring the human life that is there. And I think that it just a small change in growth for us as providers will go a long way in helping just again change and shift the culture of us as a community.
How did you deal with the stress of that as a 23-year-old paramedic making that decision? Was that hard?
I kept thinking about the fact that he pretty much looked like me.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody, and I said something to the sergeant on the way out the door. I'm like, hey, he's in crisis. The police officer's in crisis. Oh, don't worry, we'll handle it. What?
Yeah.
No,
They walked out and told him to man up.
They went to the bar after they got off work.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, as we all do.
I don't know. I don't have an answer for you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Well, I know how I dealt with stress in the beginning of my career, which was in super unhealthy ways. I don't know about you guys. But I remember I would get off of work and driving home at 7:00 in the morning and just feeling terrible because I just had a call that I feel like didn't go well, or I could have done this or done that, and just beating myself up for hours or days sometimes. And I think there's a certain degree of that being a healthy response, but I think I pushed it too far sometimes.
I think it's important to remember when doing this job that you cannot honor the wins, as we call them, right? And the losses in the same way, because they're not. We did not lose patients and we did not save patients. What we did is we showed up and we did the job that we trained for, and we did it to the best of our ability. And what happens with that patient, is really out of our hands, and barring any professional missteps, right? Provider missteps. If you show up and you do the very best job that you are trained to do with the tools that you have, and the outcome isn't successful, that's not reflection of you. And I think that it takes some time and some experience and some acceptance of other hands at work, higher powers, or whatever it is that speaks to your soul, to be able to lighten that load and recognize that we should be celebrating the effort. We should be celebrating the training. We should be celebrating the compassion and the empathy and the things that we can control when we go on scene, and working towards just making it a little better every time that we show up. And whether that means that we involve the family in a death notification, whether that means we recognize that somebody is autistic and we speak to them in the way their brain needs us to, whether it means that we build up our, coworkers and really work to helping invest in the next generation. All of these things shift our culture and build upon each other and just make things a little bit better. And that, at least, is my goal every day.
Yeah. Agreed. And, for me, I just don't want to see any of my people struggle.
Yeah.
With something. The burden's too heavy.
Mm.
It is. It is.
Well, I don't know how we end on. I don't know how we possibly end, right? But guys, thank you so much for doing this. I think this is valuable information. And I appreciate both of you so much. I'm probably one of the luckiest guys around because I work with brilliant people every day, really gifted. I'm very, very fortunate. I really mean that. And thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us. This has been a really cool experience.
Thank you.
Can't wait to hear more. That's all. How can you laugh at a time like this?
I'm so sorry.
Thank you for listening to In Service, the EMS podcast, where frontline experience meets leadership insight. If you have found value in this conversation, please like, subscribe, share, and leave a comment. You will find links in the episode notes.